over the last week and a half, there's been a lot of discussion among Democrats about what went wrong in this election season. And they've got all sorts of questions, like, was Kamala Harris uniquely that bad of a candidate? Did Joe Biden drop out too late? Did the Democrat Party focus too much on cultural issues? On and on and on the questions go. And meanwhile, of course, President-elect Trump has been busy this week appointing several people to his cabinet. But underlying all of this, regardless of which direction of interest is grabbing you, how should Christians think about all of these issues and even more? Well, joining me now to discuss these topics in our weekly Biblical Worldview segment is David Closson. He's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at the Family Research Council. David, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to have you on our Friday afternoons.
Hey, great to see you again, Jody.
You know, I wasn't sure if you're going to be here. I know you're just days away from being a dad for the first time, so we'll try to be direct and to the point, because I know action could happen quickly, but we're all prayerful and excited for you and your wife.
Thank you, Jody. 9 days is the expected due date, so definitely appreciate our listeners and viewers' prayers. 9 days, Lord willing.
9 days. How exciting. Okay, David, if I can keep your focused attention here for a few moments, let's talk about the aftermath of the election. Some Democrats have stated publicly that they think their party went too far on the transgender issue. One example that comes to mind, Representative Seth Moulton candidly distanced himself from some of the extreme transgender rhetoric that was coming from his party. And his comments, as we all can imagine, have been widely panned by some of his fellow Democrats, although some have agreed with him. So what do you make of all the Democratic intra-party squabble that's taking place right now?
Yeah, it really is a mess, Jody. And I think when you kind of look at what's happening, I think as Christians wanting to kind of look at it from a worldview angle, it's good to take a step back, first of all, and realize the issues that are kind of being debated and discussed right now in this kind of intra-party feud. These are issues of the created order, to use a real fancy seminary word. These are issues of ontology, of being. This is really actually quite basic. Male and female created he, them. This goes to the first pages of the book of Genesis, but it shows you, Jody, just how far the extreme left has pushed the Democratic Party, that even suggesting, as the representative from Massachusetts has done, that maybe we've gone a little too far. And I think in the congressman's comments, Jody, he said, I don't like the idea of my two daughters having to compete against biological men. And there was actually another congressman from New York who said the same thing. Just, Jody, even raising the issue for some people is just a bridge way too far. And so I think it's a good thing, Jody. Again, I want both political parties to understand that there are only two genders. I want both political parties to be in favor of policies that protect the intimate spaces of girls and women. I want both parties to be against cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgeries for minor children who are confused with their gender. So I hope, Jody, that the conversation taking place on the other side of the aisle leads to rethinking some of these positions, getting in line with the created order. But frankly, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's I'm with you, hoping that all these things that you just suggested come about. Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me that we're even having this discussion. Like there's more than two genders. Like, what planet are we living on? But I guess the fact is that look, I was in many of the hearings in Congress where these type of conversations, debates were taking place. So my question, David, do you think that the left is going to walk back some of these extreme positions like transgender surgeries and so forth, or are they going to just keep pressing in?
For the sake of a flourishing civil society, Jody, I hope so. But again, I'm doubtful. Just let's take a look just at the backlash against Congressman Moulton's comments. You have the governor of Massachusetts criticizing him, saying that he's playing politics with the issue. You have other kind of members of the so-called squad, AOC and folks kind of that are of her ilk, really doubling down. You have MSNBC contributors like Joy Reid coming out saying that the idea that we would try to think about some of these things that are such, core civil rights issues. That's how they view kind of the whole LGBT moral revolution. So, Jody, I don't think we're going to see much of a reconfiguring of the position. I do think, though, that, again, President Trump and his campaign, they were brilliant. The most memorable campaign commercial from this cycle is when President Trump said, Kamala Harris is for they, them, I'm for you. It was a great campaign commercial.
That was great.
And again, my hope, for the sake of human flourishing in this country, I hope the left will reconsider. But just even based on the kind of response to the situation we're talking about now, we'll see. I'm not hopeful.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath either. We could talk about this for forever, but let's switch gears. A lot of other things in the news this past week, not the least of which, of course, is President-elect Trump. He's been super busy with all sorts of appointments to his cabinet picks. All right, so how should Christians respond to some of the news coming out of Mar-a-Lago right now, specifically related to these picks?
Yeah, what an opportunity for a civics lesson. So many people have followed the election. My hope is that specifically Christians around the country would continue paying attention. Just because Donald Trump won the election, will take the oath of office in January, don't disengage from the process. I think it's, again, what we're seeing play out since the election is really important. And Jody, I think a big principle that we've talked about is elections have consequences. Who sits behind the resolute desk there at the White House, they get to make picks. They get to appoint ambassadors who represent and export American values. President Trump will get an opportunity to appoint hundreds of judges. And as we're seeing, Jody, the president gets to pick cabinet secretaries who are given just all sorts of authority. And some of the picks, Jody, that I'm seeing are just incredibly encouraging. Marco Rubio, my home state of Florida senator, he's well respected on the world stage. And as a Christian, I know where his convictions are on the social issues. Mike Huckabee, ambassador to Israel. This is a former Southern Baptist pastor. He was actually the president of the Arkansas Baptist Convention back in the day. There's other, FRC's friend Mike Waltz being the national security advisor. So a lot of these picks, Jody, are just incredible. Men and women of skill, of experience, and many of these are believers, Jody. And I think we should be incredibly encouraged by that.
Yeah, and you just hope that those voices around the president right now would be able to speak into his orbit the biblical message on multiple different issues of these agency leaders now, that they'll be able to have some comment there. And many of these people, of course, I've been able to work with, and I, like you, am just encouraged by. I think at Tom Hoban, for example, on the border, I've been with him multiple times on the border and beyond, and boy, he's serious about defending our border, which again is a biblical issue to be able to do that. So it's there's some question marks and there's some great encouragement. Let me give you one of the question marks. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the program. RFK Jr. Being tapped now to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. He's received a lot of attention, both positive and a lot of concerns and question marks. What's your take on that appointment and the reaction that it's all generated?
Yeah, I think, Jody, as a general rule of thumb, a president deserves to have their picks confirmed. The president wins his election on a specific agenda, and I think there should be a level of deference. With RFK Jr., though, I do think people like Mike Pence are raising concerns that are valid. RFK Jr. has been pro-abortion for decades. There was a few minutes, it seemed, on the campaign trail when he was running as an independent that he expressed expressed some pro-life sentiments, but then he walked those back. And so, again, Jody, I think there should be deference to a president's picks, but I do think the Senate has a constitutional duty to provide advice and consent. And in this confirmation hearing, Jody, I hope that convictional pro-life senators will ask RFK Jr. Questions related to his views on the life issue. You know, the HHS secretary, Jody, oversees the CDC, the National Institute for Health, Medicare, Medicaid, importantly, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And so under the banner and the umbrella of HHS, a lot of issues dealing with transgenderism, dealing with abortion, and just think the current Cabinet Secretary Javier Becerra has been, again, the most energetic supporter of abortion that I think HHS has ever seen. Maybe it's a toss-up between him and Kathleen Sebelius under the Obama administration. But, again, Jody, I do hope that senators will do their constitutional duty and get RFK on the record in saying that he's going to serve the president, who did run on a pretty pro-life campaign platform.
Yeah, and you talk about, and I agree with you, a president should have, generally speaking at least, the right to make the appointments that they choose within the parameters of the Senate and them fulfilling their responsibility to confirm them and so forth. But when you add to that the obvious, unquestionable mandate that comes with this particular election, I mean, the people across the country in virtually every sector overwhelmingly said, we want to get behind this agenda. Does that add a certain emphasis to the responsibility of the Senate to confirm these people?
I think it does. And again, this was an election that looked like it was just going to go down to the wire. And I think almost all of the post-election analysis and discussion has just been, Jody, I think I saw that every state, maybe except Washington State, moved right. That was something that no one foresaw in the polling. And so it is true. Donald Trump, the president-elect, the former president, has a mandate. But I do think, again, that those of us who supported him and encouraged Christians to vote, I think, again, we still have a responsibility and obligation and duty to remind the powers that be, to hold them accountable. And again, what an opportunity on this HHS secretary pick, and I think other cabinet positions as well, to remind the incoming administration that you're in power in part because tens of millions of Christians, even though they were told they weren't being faithful, even though they were told that this wasn't loving their neighbor, they voted for the incoming administration. And so I think there's a deference also that the administration should show to the millions of Christians who supported them in the campaign.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And, you look, we don't have time to get into Tulsi Gabbard as well as RFK Jr., but the president-elect is going beyond just standard Republicans. I mean, it appears as though there is an attempt to reach across the aisle, if you will, to people that he believes are experienced enough in certain areas to step up to the plate. All right, our time's running out. Let me throw this last one out. We're still waiting on a couple of races, but officially now the House of Representatives has been called for Republicans. So this means that we're going to have a unified government in Washington with Republicans in control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. All right, so the 119th Congress is going to be vastly different from what it has been in the past. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what an opportunity. And we know that times like this, Jody, are usually very brief and fleeting. And so the incoming administration, this first 100 days, they need to be aggressive. We don't have the 60-vote threshold in the Senate. So some very lofty, great legislation that we would support probably is not going to have a chance because of that 60 threshold vote. But my goodness, we can see through reconciliation tax cuts that were promised on the campaign campaign trail with the bully pulpit of the executive, and through executive orders, we can see things immediately on day one put back in place. Mexico City policy. We can see some of these egregious SOGI executive orders put in place by the Biden administration. We can see those rolled back on day one. The Department of Defense's abortion travel policy, that can be nixed on day one. And so the incoming president, working with his majorities in the Senate and the House, they can make sure that the Hyde Amendment is put into place and fully enforced. So there's going to be opportunities for wins, whether it's pro-life wins, pro-religious liberty wins, and just conservative wins. But it's going to take everyone working in concert, because again, these majorities, they don't come around often. They can be fleeting. So let's be praying that the folks who have these opportunities take advantage of them.
Thank you so much, David Closson, Director of FRC's Center for Biblical Worldview. Always great to have you on Fridays. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jody. God bless.